In the first video, we dug a hole, filled it with rocks, and poured a concrete slab. Next, I built the walls of the stand and set up forms to fill the top. We mixed up the cement, filled the forms, and then I waited for months for my brick to show up, which it finally did 2 months later. I made a change to this original design, making the countertop thinner and adding an arch to the storage area. In this video, I'll add a row of bricks all the way around the stand. I'll build the arch for the storage area, and I'll extend this wall about 2 bricks higher than the concrete top. And finally, I'll fill this cavity with an insulating mix of vermiculite and concrete. Off we go. I've never laid bricks before. It's not hard to do, but it's hard to do fast. About half of this first batch of mortar was wasted. I eventually wound up just mixing small batches by hand, enough for just 3 or 4 bricks, but I was still really optimistic at this point. This work was really tedious. Each brick needs to be perfectly straight and level, especially on the corners. Just use an 8 or 9 inch torpedo level and tap away with your trowel. I was eventually able to use a string line, which made this go a little faster. There's lots of videos online showing exactly how to do this stuff, and for some reason it's mostly British guys. Not sure why, but I'll put some links in. Mortar joints are only good under compression. It's not like a glue that'll hold these bricks to the wall, so you have to use wall ties. I put them in on every 3rd course of bricks, screwing them to the cinder block, about 16 inches apart. Make sure the wall ties don't go too far past these holes in the brick. If it's too close to the surface, you might get rust stains over time. Again, this is tedious work if you don't know what you're doing, but it's actually kind of soothing. It's like Legos for adults. Don't forget to make weep holes every 2 or 3 bricks. The bricks on these back corners had to be trimmed so that the row in back was in the right spot. Here I am mixing smaller 2 to 3 brick batches. It seems like you only have about 10 minutes to work with this mortar. Here I am forgetting to put in weep holes on this lower row. The other mistake you have to watch out for, which I made a few times, is putting the bricks the wrong way. Bricks actually have a nice side and an ugly side. At least these bricks do anyway. It's a good habit to double check your work every time you run out of mortar. That way you can fix these errors before they become more permanent. I used a broom to wet these bricks a little bit. You don't want bricks to suck the water out of the mortar too fast. But you also don't want these bricks to be too wet, so don't soak them. Again, this work is super tedious, but it's about to get a little more interesting. I made this freestanding form for the arch. Thankfully, I realized that I would have no way of removing the form without destroying the bricks I carefully laid on top. So I screwed this scrap semicircle to the arch form and then removed it. These screw holes will allow me to cut the form in half and then put it back together with its original alignment. I just screwed that scrap semicircle back in place using the same holes. Now when it comes time to remove the form, I can unscrew these again and collapse it just a little bit, hopefully enough to pull it out. For this arch, I decided to cut each brick into a wedge, rather than having wedge-shaped mortar joints. So I needed to calculate the angle that is swept by the width of a brick, using the outer radius of this arch. So I went to the interweb and I found a tool that calculates an isosceles triangle. The height of the brick is 2.25 inches. That's our base. The height is the radius of the arch. The form radius is 12 inches, but you have to add the width of your brick for the outer arch. So each brick will sweep 8 degrees of the arch. So divide by 2, and we have about 4 degrees on each side. Do yourself a favor and cut all these bricks first. I suppose I should have covered how to cut these things, but it's super easy. Just use a regular chop saw with one of these stupidly expensive blades. Finally getting close to the top here. You should find yourself roughly close to center, and just use whatever size sliver you need to finish the arch. I worked into the night to finish up one side, and while I probably should have been more patient, I decided this next morning would be the moment of truth. Taking this form out was terrifying, but a few more taps and it came right out. My work here isn't perfect.
It's 2 of my screw-ups right here. That looks terrible. And also, this super wide mortar joint looks terrible.
But the things that have to be perfect are, this is the second to last row, so it really has to be level. It's time to take a break.
We're filming.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This is a foam chuck glider we bought for 20 bucks. I installed old RC equipment from the last plane I crashed. Back to business. This is a brick joiner you'll need to buy for about 10 bucks. I think you're supposed to wait a while after setting these bricks before you do this, but I basically just did it right away after each section of bricks. I was finally getting better at this stuff and moving a little faster. In hindsight, looking back and narrating these videos, I wouldn't recommend laying bricks with sandals on. This was a cool treat for the kids. Apparently does will stash their newborn fawns somewhere safe during the day while they go find food. This little guy sat there and watched me work all day, and he was gone in the morning. Home stretch for this brickwork. I carefully laid these corner bricks and made sure they were level in each direction. I'll eventually be screeding the insulating concrete with these bricks as a guide. Here I'm using that string line method and working under this portable tent, which I should have picked up a long time ago. With this last row, I was finally finished with this brick. Before we go on to the next step, I need to zip back and show you something I did a few weeks earlier. I needed to drill holes in the top of this thing for drainage, so I used this old picture to help me avoid hitting the rebar. I should have known this old cordless drill wasn't going to cut it. Even this bigger corded drill had some trouble, probably because it's a slower torque drill. But it eventually got through, and I no longer have any concerns about the strength of this concrete. I'll drill the last 2 holes once I move this brick. I'll put some mosaic tile like this upside down on top over the holes before pouring the insulation layer, so any water that finds its way through will go through the channels on the tile and eventually to one of these holes. Back to the present. Here's the cheap tile I bought to make channels for drainage. It was really slippery on the concrete, so I used a few dots of glue on each sheet. I also used this cement board tape on all the seams, and I actually just kept going with it until I ran out of tape. I really want to keep the vermiculite concrete out of these channels. It's time to mix A4 vermiculite with Portland cement in order to make a lightweight insulating concrete for the hearth. I'm counting out 5 buckets of vermiculite for each bucket of cement. I'll dry mix these components before adding about 2 buckets of water. Some people suggest mixing the water and cement first, but this seemed more complicated to me, and I've seen plenty of people online do it this way. You want to mix this completely, but you'll run into problems if you mix it too much. You'll start getting clumps of cement separating from the vermiculite. So most people online suggest avoiding using any kind of drill or mixers. The consistency you're going for here is kind of like that kinetic sand that kids play with. Just dump it in and push it around. I'm actually pouring this in 2 stages, so I don't need to worry about making it perfectly flat until I pour the second stage. You can pat it down a little bit, but you don't want to overly compress the spongy vermiculite, and you don't want to push any granules into the cracks between the tiles below. Those channels are what's going to lead the water to the holes in the hearth to allow this to drain. This is about a 4 foot by 4 foot square with 2 modular bricks of thickness, and it took me 4 of these buckets to fill it halfway. And I went through 1 4 cubic foot bag of vermiculite. I only have 1 more bag, so hopefully that's enough. If you have extra, you can mix it with the same 5-to-1 ratio and pour it into a bucket. After it cures, your kids can carve it up with a spoon and make statues. We'll have more on this later. I'll give this at least a week to cure and dry out, and I'll probably cover this up for the first 24 hours, especially if you think it might rain. Like an idiot, I got caught off guard by a rainstorm. I learned from my brick expert that I should have filled these holes in with mortar. So I sucked the water out, let it dry for a few weeks, and then got to work filling those holes. I scraped off the excess. This top has to be really smooth so I can use it as a guide when I'm screeding the next layer of insulating concrete. I didn't have quite enough vermiculite to finish the job, so I ran out to buy a bit more. Even that wasn't quite enough, but I was able to scoop some from the corners to finish the area that really needed it, the area under the footprint of the dome. It's a little bit shoddy, but this outer area will be covered by a poured concrete countertop. That's it for this video. This is where I'm at today. It'll take another week for this insulating concrete to fully cure and dry out, and I've already got the next step sitting on my garage floor. I really want to be cooking pizzas by the end of summer, so stay tuned. And remember to like, subscribe, follow, comment, and all that.